تجري من تحتها الأنهار. In one of the visions that the Prophet is reported to have seen of the place of his immigration, he saw a saline flatland, sabkha, with date palms between two tracts of lava rock. Again, you can't see anything in this picture. There's such a wonderful image of Uhud in the background. That's strange. All right, anyway, we'll have to make do. Here you can see the lava tract. It's lava which has flowed out of cracks, volcanic cracks, and has been there mostly for a long time. Let's see. Now, Medina, again, if you go back a little bit, it wasn't one town with a wall. It was little villages, hamlets, scattered throughout the oasis. This is about 20 miles. This is about 12 miles across. And there were Arab clans of Aus and Khazraj scattered all over because it couldn't support a large city. And there were three major Jewish tribes as well, which we will talk about. That's Masjid Quba, by the way. And before the Prophet ﷺ had come to Medina, Medina underwent a century. We talk about 100 Years' War or the War of Roses or something. Well, Medina had its own War of Roses, and it wasn't all roses. It was a war between the Aus and the Khazraj, which lasted on and off for 100 years. And by the time, 5 years before the emigration, there was a great battle, Ma'rakat al-Bu'ath, in which many of the great chieftains of both Aus and Khazraj were killed. And so they were desperate to have an outside mediator come in and improve their situation. Again, I apologize for the image and the way it looks. This is the eastern lava tract. How would you like to be on a camel crossing this? Camels don't wear horseshoes, iron on their feet. Their feet are very delicate. Can you imagine a camel trying to cross that? Even horses aren't very comfortable there. Now, if you go back to this, all of this is similar lava tract. And so Medina has a natural defensive barrier on three sides. It's very difficult to attack. You can attack it on foot, and that has happened. But if you bring cavalry with you, if you bring horses with you, the horses are really only valuable on an open field where you can use their weight and attack. If you wanted to attack with horses, you would have to follow a path. And that path you could be waylaid very easily by your opponents with bows and arrows. And horses hate bows and arrows. They hate rocks, and they don't like anything thrown at them. So there you see part of what the reality of the geography of Medina and the way it was protected from three sides. There are four principal mazarat, places of visitation in Medina. And I say principal because there is prophetic precedent for visiting these places. And one of them, of course, is the Prophet's Mosque. And there are wonderful hadith about the merits of praying in the mosque, and it's worth so and so many prayers in any other place. Similarly, with Masjid Quba. There are amazing hadith that if you make your ablution in your house and you go to Masjid Quba only for the purpose of praying rak'atayn in it, you get the ajr of an umrah. There are a few narrations of a similar hadith where it talks about even hajj, but certainly very precious, and especially if you were a Muslim living in Medina at that time, and the Quraysh didn't want you to come to Mecca. You could go to Quba and have access to that wonderful ajr. In addition, there were two cemeteries that are primary mazarat. One of them is Baqi al-Gharqad, that the Prophet ﷺ himself frequently went to, especially in his last years and months. He would frequently go there and pray for the Ahl al-Baqiyah. And at least once a year after the Battle of Uhud, he would go to the cemetery at Uhud and pray for the martyrs at Uhud. Are these the only places to visit in Medina? Certainly not. Why are there many, many, many places to pray in Medina? Does anyone know? We often think, or we're led to think, that in Medina, everybody went to the Prophet's mosque every day and prayed their 5 prayers. And nothing could be further from the truth. Every clan throughout the scattered oasis, and it could take you 45 minutes, an hour to walk from one part of the oasis to another, every clan had its own mosque for the 5 daily prayers. And in many of these, the Prophet ﷺ himself inaugurated these mosques, or said this is the Qibla, or prayed in them for tabarruk, in a sense, for the people that used it as well. And not all of these mosques have survived. In fact, most of them have not survived. But among those that have survived, one that belonged to the Bani Salima is Masjid Qiblatain. We call it Qiblatain now, but it used to be a clan mosque of what was his name? Al-Barra ibn Ma'rur, who lived in that area. It was, we'll see it later, but Qiblatain is about there. One of, not the first, because the Prophet's mosque was rebuilt in the time of Abu Bakr. It wasn't rebuilt, it was simply the date palm trunks were replaced, the seating of date palm leaves was replaced, some of the bricks might have been touched up, but it wasn't changed in size. When Omar came along, he expanded it Qibla-wise to the south. And Uthman, one row. Uthman did the same, but he expanded it 2 rows. And Uthman actually rebuilt the mosque in stone and with teak roofs, and it was quite a substantial building. But in early Umayyad times, there was a governor of Medina that I'm sure some of you know if you know Islamic history, because he came to be known as Khamis al-Khulafa al-Rashidun, or Rashidin, the 5th of the rightly guided caliphs. His name was Omar ibn Abdul Aziz. And he was governor in Medina during the reign of, now my mind fails me again. Allahumma salli wa sallim wa barak ala sayyidina. No, it was Abdul Malik's son. Walid. Sorry, Walid. It was Walid who ordered the Prophet's mosque to be rebuilt. And at the same time, he ordered his governor, Omar ibn Abdulaziz, to ask people all the spots where the Prophet had prayed in Medina. what is masjid? What does it mean? Does it mean this thing with, steel reinforced concrete? No, a masjid is simply a place where you prostrate. Masjid, a place of prostration. And at that time, there were many places out in the open, for example, this one, that Omar, all he did was build, you could call it preservation walls. No roof, no furniture, simply a mihrab, so that people, whoever went there would know where the qibla was. And this particular one is southwest of Quba Mosque, and it's called Masjid Musabbih, and it's associated with the Prophet's hijrah, that he prayed at this spot, that it's disputed. But the reason I'm showing it, very simple, very modest, dating from the time of Omar ibn Abdulaziz. There are very few of these left. Most of them have been either rebuilt or simply destroyed and incorporated into developments, into housing development and so forth. This particular map, again, south is here, so the Qibla is in this direction, and Mecca is also in this direction. Qibla wasn't in this direction at that time. And Abu Bakr and the Prophet ﷺ came this route on their hijrah to Quba Mosque. This basically shows where that arrow was, and this road, and this is taken a long time ago, it doesn't look like a construction site anymore. This is Masjid Quba. These are the wonderful date palms of Aliyat al-Medina, of the highlands of Medina. And this road is actually Tariq al-Hijra. It's the highway that goes to Mecca, turns off to Jeddah, and so forth. Now, it's said that the Prophet ﷺ stayed perhaps, well, it varies. Some people say he stayed there 3 days, 8 days. I mean, it doesn't really matter that much. But he eventually decided that being at this location with one of the clans of Aus, it didn't make too much sense, especially as the center of the oasis was here. And so one day he decided that he was going to let his camel find his new final residence in Medina. You know the famous story of Qaswa and him letting the reins go and the camel wandering here and there and people grabbing the camel. And he says, no, let the camel find its own way. And eventually he got to the Prophet's mosque. But en route at this mosque, which is now this mosque, it's Masjid Juma. And it's there where the Prophet ﷺ prayed his first Jumu'ah prayer and gave his first Jumu'ah khutbah. I'm not saying it's the first Jumu'ah that was ever prayed, but for the Prophet in Medina, it was. And thank you. And if you think about it, before going to Medina, would it have been easy for the Prophet to pray a Jumu'ah prayer in Mecca? Almost impossible. Almost impossible. Maybe way out in the outskirts but not at the Kaaba. I mean, they were oppressed. They were ridiculed and despised. But in Medina, even if they weren't in the majority, they had powerful protectors, and they could pray publicly, and that's what they did. The Prophet arrived in Medina in September of 622, and the total number of initial immigrants who came either before or after he did was about 100. Once the prophet reached the place where his trusted she-camel Qaswa settled, he said, this is where I'm going to build my mosque. And living quite close by was Abu Ayyub al-Ansari, who grabbed his saddlebags and whisked them into his house. And the Prophet said, well, a man has to go with his saddlebags, because everybody wanted to have him stay with him. And he went into Abu Ayyub's house. And he stayed with Abu Ayyub for, oh dear, I was going to say 7 months. 7 months. And the mosque served many, many functions. It was the place of the Prophet's residential compound. He and his wives and children and family and so forth. It was also a community center, a town hall, a courthouse, a debating hall, a lecture hall, a hospice. It was kind of like a hotel where you could put people, especially in the courtyard. It was mostly courtyard. A hospital. After battles, sometimes people would be treated in the courtyard. Sa'd ibn Mu'adh, after he was wounded at the Battle of the Trench, died in the courtyard of the Prophet's mosque, because that's where he was being treated. And also a town hall or assembly point. The Prophet's aspiration that the Jews would at least acknowledge his mission. Muslims and Jews at this time shared a common direction of prayer, Jerusalem, and the observance of common fast, Ashura, and certain dietary restrictions. This map, although it's probably not that easy for you to read it, shows you the complexity, politically speaking, of Medina. The blue are Jewish tribes, and the first one to be forced out of Medina was Banu Qaynuqa, which was close to the Souq, the central market. Then you had Bani al-Nadir, which was shortly after Badr. They were forced out, and then the Bani Qurayza, it was after the Battle of the Trench. And then you have Aus and Khazraj, and just because it says Aus and Khazraj, it kind of belies the complexity of it, because there were some Aus who were allied with the Khazraj and not with their fellow Aus. And there were some, I mean, it was incredibly complicated. Dozens of clans and sub-clans, and also many people who didn't belong to either clan and were proteges. All right, let's see. And many of these clans, at least until the year of the Battle of the Trench, the year 5 of the Hijrah, were not Muslim. They were pagan. The Arab tribe, many of the Arab tribes were pagan. And the Muhajirun, the emigres or the immigrants from Mecca, were hosted by many different tribes in the oasis. At a certain point, and it's said that certain leaders of certain Jewish tribes became very aggressive and assertive, and at one point were questioning the Prophet. How can you possibly question our authority when you pray to our Qibla? That was what the Jews were telling the Prophet. And this gradually built up until the Prophet longed for there to be a different Qibla. they thought that they had authority over him because of the Qibla. And it was about 18 months after the Hijrah, the Qibla was changed at this spot, at Qiblatain. One should bear in mind that Medina, every mosque in Medina is Masjid Qiblatain. I mean, every traditional mosque, because they all had two Qiblas. The Prophet's mosque had two Qiblas and so forth. I don't mean literally two. I mean, the niche in the wall was even in the Prophet's time, they didn't have niches, an architectural Qibla, but you still had two prayer directions in all of the mosques. This shift in prayer, of direction in prayer from Jerusalem to Mecca, as I said, about 17 months after the Hijrah, what it did was to reaffirm the primacy of Abraham, who was neither a Christian nor a Jew. So we follow Abraham. And if you know the history of Mecca well, you know that Mecca is Al-Haram Al-Ibrahimi. Medina is Al-Haram Nabawi. It's the Haram of our Prophet. But Mecca was established long before the Prophet, and he recognized that again and again and again. And in a sense, the Tahwil al-Qibla was a manifest challenge to the Quraysh, because it basically said, we are determined to reclaim Mecca as the center of our spiritual universe. I mean, that's where Mecca, that's where Abraham established the Kaaba and the rites of pilgrimage. And beware. Unfortunately, you can't see this very well. It's quite a good image. It's a little mosque with three domes. And I'll bet none of you has ever seen it. Has any of you ever seen it? Have any of you ever been to the Hejaz railway station? Because the Turks built a railroad from Damascus all the way down to Medina, and the terminus, the end station, has a big train yard, and this is behind the fence of that train yard. It's called Masjid Suqya. And at Suqya, the Prophet ﷺ, it was a gathering point, a flat place in the lava tract, where he gathered troops and supplies and reviewed his troops before marching on Badr. And so it was a very critical time, very critical period. And at this particular site, he asked for ablution water, made his ablution. In some cases, they say it said that he prayed rakatain. Other cases, he just made a long dua. And that dua was for blessings on the people of Medina and blessings on the rizq of Medina, on the provision and the plenitude of the crops and so forth. And in the same prayer, he says, and just as Abraham rendered Mecca an inviolable sanctuary, I render Medina an inviolable sanctuary. So it was there that Medina was declared a haram. Now, of course, when we go to Medina and people talk about the haram, and nimshil haram, people mean the mosque. But the haram is actually, I mean, the Saudis have defined it about this big. Other hadith, they say between the two lava tracts, Medina's two lava tracts, but between, often like Beina Jambeya, I mean, it includes everything up to that point. So it could be that far. In any case, because it has no ritual significance, like in Mecca, the Haram has a ritual significance. You can't cross a certain line without being in a certain state, consecrated state. Medina doesn't have that, but it's still a Haram in the sense that its wild plants are protected and its wild fauna, I mean, in as much as they still exist. All right. This is Wadi al-Aqiq, that's the Wadi al-Mubarak. And behind it, you should be able to see Uhud, but you can't. These are the blessed date palm trees of the highlands of Medina, which include Ajwa, which is considered, according to hadith, among the fruit from among the fruits of paradise. And the Prophet ﷺ, when you read history of Medina and hadith and the fada'il of Medina, you realize that the Prophet, when he walked and looked at things, he already had one foot in al-akhirah. He could sense things that were of paradisical substance and things that were of the opposite substance. And he often made comments, this well is a well of the wells of paradise, that fruit is like that. And Medina has more places like this, of course the most famous being Rawda Sharifa, than Mecca, in terms of locations of paradisical grace. All right. Very, very quickly, I'm going to race through the Battle of Uhud. Here's the Prophet's mosque, the route to Uhud. The Quraysh were already encamped there. The Prophet set up his troops with their backs against the mountain and the slope going down. That's militarily the more advantageous position. And they attacked like this. The horses under Khalid ibn Walid, and I think it was Amr ibn al-As, or I don't remember who the other commander was, they couldn't find a way to break in until the archers, this is Jabal al-Rumah, the archers mount, until they abandoned their posts and joined, getting the booty, and that's when the battle swung in the other direction. There's an image from on top of the mountain. It actually is quite interesting because it talks about it shows the gorge into which the Prophet ﷺ and his companions fled and went up the hillsides to seek refuge from the marauding Qurayshi troops. Medina is often pictured as a walled city, but it didn't become a walled city until about 300 years after the Hijrah. What you had instead was date palm orchards surrounded by basalt rocks. As you were digging in the date palm gardens, you would pull out the rocks and they would become your wall. And the whole city was a maze of pathways leading through that. You can imagine how impossible it is to charge an army through that. You don't do that. When the Quraysh came in the year 5 to finally destroy the Muslims at the Battle of the Trench, it was Salman al-Farisi who advised them to dig a trench, and they did not dig a trench around the city. There was no city, so to speak. Where did they dig the trench? They dug the trench along the soft underbelly of Medina. This is all lava tract. Not impenetrable, but you can't attack it in mass on horseback. But here, it's the perfect place for horses to charge. And when they did, they suddenly had to stop short because there was a 2 meter, 2.5 meter gap, maybe a couple of meters deep. And on the other side of it, on the defender's side, they piled up all the soil and rocks that they had dug out. And so rocks were a wonderful weapon. And you would throw rocks at the enemy. This you can't see very well, Jebel Sala, which is that mountain, and it served as a kind of bastion lookout for the Muslims who were defending the trench. And in this mosque, it's actually on a spur of Jebel Sala. You don't see it now because there's a mosque built on top of it, but that's where he prayed for victory over the Quraysh for 3 days. And on Wednesday, between Dhuhr and Asr, his prayer was answered. And if you go to this mosque and you pray between Dhuhr and Asr on a Wednesday, your prayer will be answered too, inshallah. This is a more recent photo because you can see the umbrellas around the Prophet's mosque. And people curious about what is the qabr like? You know, they're looking into a qabr. There's no body there. I mean, it's just an empty. But in a way, it's almost admirable, because when you go to a cemetery, you should think about death, and you should imagine yourself in that hole. And that's what they were doing. And that's an important part of visiting Medina Munawwara. Thank you very much. I've been given a couple of notices, and I better not outstay my welcome. Will we pray now? Oh, we do. All right. So there is time. All right. Very good. Very good.
We'll do the QA at this time. You can either raise your hand and ask questions, or there should be note cards going around as well.
I'd almost prefer just to raise your hand and ask a question, and I don't know if they need a microphone. There is a microphone here if you want to.
Where on that map was the Battle of Badr?
It's actually. Let's see if I can. It won't be on this map because Badr is about 3 days ride from Medina. But I'll show you in the regional map. Badr is here overlooking the Red Sea. It's southeast of Yambua. So it was 2.5, 3 day march.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you very much for the very informative lecture. Some of us may be avid to learn a little bit more about you and maybe your journey to Islam. Maybe a question off topic a little bit, but we don't, some of us may not know you well and would like to learn more about you. Thank you very much.
That's to be expected. I mean, actually, living in Medina Munawwara was after years of living in Morocco and years of living in Egypt, where every taxi driver wants to know your life story and how did you become a Muslim and so forth. Medina, people have seen Muslims of every color and size and shape, and I mean they don't care. I mean, oh, you're a Muslim. Oh, we're all Muslims. I mean, it was kind of a relief, but I don't mind at all. I mean, and perhaps, I mean, maybe I'll come back and give another lecture on the stages of my life. But I became a Muslim in Morocco in 1977. And at that time, I was 22 years old and quite an adventurer. I wanted to hike in the high Atlas Mountains, and I did that. And one of the things I had with me to read was a translation of the Quran. It was Muhammad Marmaduke Pickthall's translation, which I love because it's elevated English. And I walked through the high Atlas Mountains and the passes and everything like that, reading Marmaduke, reading the English translation, didn't know Arabic at the time. And the Quran very often refers to the signs of God in nature. آيات الله في الخلق وعلى الآفاق. I mean, on the horizon. And it talks about the sun and the moon and the stars and so forth. And if you're living in a city, a street light will blind your eyes to the glory of the galaxies. But when you're up in the Atlas Mountains, there is no electricity. There are no roads. And so you've never seen stars like that. I mean, it was very, very, very heavy. And I came out of the mountains convinced that I had to do something about my spiritual life. I was still very American, and Americans tend to want to create their own religions. I'll take a little bit of Buddhism and a little bit of this and that and so forth. And it took some serious talking from a Muslim to make me realize that I really had no choice. I mean, here was the most recent religion, the least spoiled, with the most spiritual possibilities in it. But the time in the Atlas Mountains, with all of its dangers and with its beauty, it opened my heart. And the Quran itself, I mean, spoke to me, even though I didn't know Arabic. I was reading it in English. But there are many aspects to it. I mean, you can imagine Morocco, they have a wonderful tradition of handicrafts and traditional clothes. And I mean, there's a real nobility in the simple people that you meet. And that affected me also. I mean, so that's the short version. Inshallah, we'll do the long version sometime. The sisters shouldn't be all silent and close-lipped. I mean, come on, you could think of a question. Anyway, I won't put undue pressure. Yes. 4 years. I was there from 1984 to 88, and I was teaching at what at that time was a فرع من جامعة الملك عبد العزيز in Jeddah, and it was the كلية التربية. It has now become جامعة طيبة. It's an independent university, has all sorts of different schools and so forth. At that time, it was quite small. Yeah. 4 years.
How many of the original landmarks are still left in Medina? I was in Hajj last September, and we took us on a bus ride to Jabal Ahmad. This is the second time because I went to Umrah again in 2000. And when you go there, and for us, I mean, we learned about Jabal Ahmad in third grade and fourth grade. So the first time I went to Jabal Ahmad, it was extremely exciting. The second time I went, I was extremely disgusted. I mean, it my attention. It was too hot, too dusty. Wasn't easy to walk. There were a lot of crowds. The place is not well taken care of. I mean, obviously, the Saudis don't care about landmarks. That's what I came up with. So, what is left of the original landmarks other than Jabal?
I like your observation. Obviously, there are certain landmarks that the authorities have devoted a great deal of national treasure to preserving. Masjid Qiblatain is an example. I mean, it's a magnificent architecture. They cleaned up the area around it. Masjid Quba is another example of tremendous job in building a large, beautiful building. But it's true that there are many secondary landmarks that aren't known by many people. And during the years that I was in Medina, I saw the bulldozer remove quite a few of them. And in part, there are two things going on. One of them is the monarchy has to give a green light to the fuqaha, the Salafi fuqaha, to destroy certain things, and many of them are associated with the Nakhawila, with the Shia of Medina, and they love to destroy those things. And so for the monarchy, it's keeping the fuqaha on your side by allowing them to do unimportant things. And then you can still show whatever programs you want on television for the middle classes. And I mean, there's politics involved. And another aspect is we are living in the reign of quantity. Whoever imagined there would be 5 million hujjaj going on Hajj. In other words, you need to be able to accommodate masses of people. And so all around the Prophet's mosque, which was the most historical area in Medina, it all had to be removed. I mean, and more will be removed as they expand the mosque further. And if you want millions more people to benefit from ziyarah and from also going on Hajj and so forth, you don't have many options in terms of development. I mean, engineering-wise, you're limited just by you're going to have this many people. I mean, when I went on Hajj in 2012, I was shocked by the building that housed Ramil Jamarat at Mina. It looked like a Soviet-era parking garage, and inside it was the industrialization of ritual. I mean, but it was efficient, because when I went in 1986, I was almost killed at the same place because it was so dangerous. So it's a trade-off in a sense. I mean, you give up some of the aesthetic aspects. La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. I mean, the Rawda, for example. I mean, when I lived in Medina, I mean, I sometimes had the Rawda almost to myself. I mean, and now it's always crowded, always crowded. Yeah. But your point is well taken, and you have a sensitive soul. I mean, yeah. And of course, the other aspect is dunya. I mean, tijara. I mean, there's a lot of money to be made at Hajj, and the monarchy also has to give certain sectors of the population the opportunity to build hotels and to build shopping malls and things like that to make money. I mean, it's yeah. I mean, but alhamdulillah, they have spent a lot of money, and if you're looking hashak, for a toilet or something, it's going to be there. I mean, it's not. I mean, they haven't spared money in that sense. I mean, anyway. Other questions? Please don't be shy. I mean, they can be far from the topic, or they can be on topic.
We're gonna have like a snack, like a little break. So if you guys want to meet the brother Daoud in person and talk to him, ask any questions, you guys are more than welcome to do that. So just a few announcements. If you haven't already done so, if you're not getting reminders for GPS programs, text add GPS OPPC to 81010. That's add GPS OPPC to 81010. You could also follow GPS on Twitter and Facebook for reminders. And our next program, inshallah, will be on August 19th, so stay tuned. Another hand for the speaker.